All right. Hello, hello. Welcome, everybody. Welcome. Happy Friday. Happy 6 weeks left in the year. Like,
Whoa.
what is going on? And welcome back to our series on So You Want to Build a Brand. This month, we are really talking about all the different types of branding, brands. What does it mean? We started last week with Malika Malhotra, who talked to us about the kind of first aspect of building a brand is who are you? What do you do? Who do you serve? And really, the important step there is to kind of niche yourself down or just figure out who you are before you can move on to anything else. And that's where we are going to talk to my lovely friend Andrea from Tacks Photography
Oh,
about one of those other things. Because I think a lot of times in branding, people hear from me, Andrea, graphic designers, but really you got to start with Malika. You got to start by understanding who your brand is.
yep.
Then we can tell you about all the things you need. And one of those in huge pieces is photography. And I'm going to let Andrea introduce herself and tell us a little bit about brand photography and what in the world that means. I feel like it's the buzz these days, but you
Oh,
tell us.
totally. Yeah, 100%. So, my name is Andrea. I am the owner and photographer at Tacks Photography in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. I serve small businesses and mid-sized businesses all up and down the East Coast. And yeah, branding photography, what I do for brands is I support them with their visual identity. So, ideally, people are coming to me and have already flushed out those things such as the brand textures, their brand voice, and their logos and everything. And they have an idea of how they want to communicate to their clients. But if they don't, I help them sort that out by giving referrals to other vendors that I'm friends with, or um, you know, helping them navigate how to find their voice and their target audience.
I love that. And now, I don't know about you guys watching, but I feel like in the last like 5 years, the word brand photography has come up everywhere. Um, And I know in our entrepreneur world, it's known. And I think that people are pretty familiar with what it does. But do you feel like this concept of brand photography is like really taken off and like over the last, like, throughout your career as a photographer? Like, or am I just making that up?
Yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to small businesses, brand photography has skyrocketed. When people used to think of photographic campaigns, they would think of a larger company like a Nike or something having to do brand photography to support their campaigns and whatever products they're launching. But over the years, especially during COVID, when we weren't allowed to sell our products in person and we weren't allowed to meet in person, having a visual identity online and having a presence online that is consistent and has the same message. So people, when they see your imagery posted or shared in an email or however you're communicating with your target audience, knows at a instant that it's you communicating with them. So brand photography definitely has become more and more essential as you are starting a business or curating content for your business.
And it's such a good point too, because I feel like even for me, my business skyrocketed during the pandemic because people couldn't meet in person. So you really had to use digital platforms to get yourself out there. And text only gets you so far. You need the photography, especially in this day and age of platforms like Instagram and Facebook, where the visual is just so key. Um, and I should have had you say this first before I asked questions, but for the unknowing audience, like technique, what is a brand photo? What is the difference? Is that just a headshot, or give us a little understanding for the unknown.
Yeah, I I mean, brand photography can mean something different from business to business. So for me, like brand photography for photographers could probably be me servicing in the act of servicing or taking photos of someone or styling a product. But also, my work,
Yeah.
what the final result is and the experience that the client can expect. So the places that I'm working, and just trying to communicate the same voice in the type of imagery and the way that the imagery is photographed and edited to what the actual experience is when they're working with me. And that's what I'm trying to do for my clients as well. So whether they're a spa or whether they're an arts and crafts company or whether they are a maker of some sort, we want to show a behind the scenes of what the client experience is so people get a preview of what they're going to experience working with you. But also, people love to see a behind the scenes of what a product
Totally.
looks like as it's being made, or how a team works together to get a result, like a for example, a new employee if you're a staffing agency.
Yeah.
So it really covers any sort of business, and it looks different from business to business.
Yeah, and it's so true. And anytime that I've done branding photography, you might think like, oh, what is a writer? But you set us up in situations where it's like clear, we're like conversing, and those are real things that happens. Especially for me, I'm always very interactive with my clients.
Mhm.
So maybe just putting me sitting at a computer wouldn't be the best bet of how I work. I'm always talking and being energetic and meeting with my team. So
Mhm.
I think there are absolutely ways to showcase people, even if you don't have a hardcore product. But of course, actual tangible products are probably a little bit easier. And that's why you gave the example of Nike, because that's a true product.
Mhm.
Um, but tell us, what does branding photography look like to different businesses? I know you had a good example, and I would love for you to kind of share that to give us that kind of visual understanding.
Yeah, sure. So brand photography comes from, your conversation last week about brand identity, right? So one of the things that you want to be sorting out during your determination of your brand identity and how you want to be represented in your marketing is your visual identity. And that means how photos are taken, how they're edited, and how people are being portrayed in them, correct? So
Yeah.
an example that we were talking about offline is, let's just talk about fitness. So Planet Fitness uses like bright and colorful photography to target um, people who are getting started in the gym or are looking for a more affordable option to go to the gym. They want to be welcoming, and they're trying to make it a less intimidating experience for the person who is trying to get back in shape, right? That's their
Yes.
target market. And their visual identity being bright and colorful with smiling faces and clean facilities has that for them. Where when you look at something like a Soul Cycle, they're looking for that like next tier of athlete, right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
they're looking for that person who is looking for an intense workout. The photography is like dark and moody with edgy
A
lighting and flash, and it
lot of
speaks.
muscles and
Yeah,
like
yeah,
sweat
exactly. It
dripping.
speaks
Yeah.
more to, like, the actual experience of actually being in a Soul Cycle class where you're in the dark, the music's blaring and everything like that. So, um, that's a really good example of
That's an
2
awesome
businesses that are in
example.
the same type of industry, but how their brand photography looks when put side by side entirely different. And that is something that when you're looking at or determining your brand and how you're trying to position yourself in the market and who you're trying to target, if you're trying to be a welcoming gym that's not intimidating and approachable, dark and moody and edgy photography may not be the right approach.
And
So,
that's why having your own photography is so critical. And we
mhm.
will talk about stock photography and whatnot in a minute. But I think that's a great example because those two do offer very different vibes. And that's, what we talked about last week is that your brand is really your vibe. And you want to be an accurate representation of who you are and what you offer people. Um, Perfect example. The very first time I did brand photography when I started about 5 years ago, I didn't know anything about this, and the photographer at the time was like asking me all these questions and like, should we do some photo shoots like, with you on the floor and your shoes off? And I was like, no, like, that's just not me. Maybe sometimes I do that, but not
Mhm.
really. And that was like a perfect like click in my brain of like, it's not just photography, it's a true representation.
Yeah.
Because she's like, if you don't work on the floor with your shoes off, then we shouldn't put that. And I was like, and I don't want that to be the representation. I'm working with kind of more serious companies. So I want to make sure the images are of this serious person, but I also
Mhm.
want to be approachable. And
Right.
that's, where like the light and bright aspect comes in and
Mhm.
having my team with me. So those tiny little nuances sound like they do really make all the difference. Anything from shoes off to, sweat dripping down or smiling faces.
Yeah, and a lot of times when people come to me as a photographer when talking about branding, they don't understand why I'm asking these questions of, okay, well, what are your brand colors? How do you want to be portrayed? Would you like what kind of car does the person that you're targeting drive? Like this is the type of stuff I want to know because if you think about how those brands are marketing to the client. You might be thinking about trying to align the way that your imagery comes across the same way. Um, just having more information and more of an avatar of what your target audience or client is helps me do my job to make sure that your um, brand and your visual identity aligns with the messaging that you're trying to have on your own website.
That's so cool. That's a good point. So if somebody is signing up for brand photography, I feel like they might, and you're not familiar with it, you might just think it's like Sears where you like show up and, oh, is that a reference people may not get? Okay. Well, they think it's like the mall, where you
Mhm.
just like are waiting in a line and taking photos. There's a whole
Yep.
process. Tell us a little bit about the process and, why that's so important. You already kind of did, but backtrack a little bit. And, are you meeting with them? Is it questionnaires or what does
Yeah,
that
I
look
mean, it's
like?
a combination of both. So my goal with a branding session is to give you as much legs with the content that we're creating. So
Yeah.
it's not just your headshot or just a photo used for LinkedIn or just a photo that you're going to have on your site that will last you the next month or so, unless we're doing some sort of retainer.
Yeah.
um, but if it's like a one and done, like I can only do this once a year branding session, we're trying to identify what your key promotions are that year, any sort of like potential announcement or anything. So like, is there a significant anniversary happening with the company that year? Should we be including like a couple shots during your branding session for something like that, or some sort of celebratory image for that's more generic? Um, and then I've fallen down the rabbit hole of celebration, but like um, basic services as well, or basic ways that your product is used. Just so you have a generic backlog of stuff that you can pull from, whether you're doing a blog post or announcing something or doing an email blast that's specific to what you need to get done. So that's one of the questions we have is, are there any promotions or anything significant happening in the next 3 to 6 months that you will need visual content for that will align with your brand. So you're not going on Google and just pulling a picture of a birthday cake or something offline.
Or like me, I took a brand photo when it was my company's second birthday,
Mhm.
and we had that. This is my creative director might kill me for this, but it was my 42nd birthday last month. We literally drew in a 4 to the 2. It was so good. She did so good. It looked so real. Sorry, Melissa. But don't be like me. Don't do that. I should have told Andrea last time I saw her. They're like, "Oh, I need some birthday photos."
Right.
Um, but you don't always think of it, and that's where Andrea comes in, is like
Mhm.
helping you think of those things and really being proactive about it.
Yeah.
And I think that's where a lot of the kind of mundane images too come in. I think in the beginning, when I first learned about brand photography, and my photographer Jesse was like just taking photos of like my like AirPods and like my pen and stuff. I was like, what?
Mm.
But those things all matter.
Yeah.
That all can be incorporated into the background on a social media post or a
Mhm.
blog or something like that. And
Yep.
that's probably the part that people probably don't realize about as much, if I'm not mistaken, where you're taking those kind of like still shots, right? But those still count for something, right? You want to tell us like about that?
Yeah,
Like,
totally. Like the I really like the like the teamwork collaboration type images. They're really good opportunities to showcase your team, but also if you have something going on with a team member, you have photos of them working with each other on a team, or like if you're talking about a general service or something, those photos can be used as well when you're all working together. And then yeah, those curated stock images of the keyboard
yes,
and the Lauren Perna pen and all of that. Like
the
that's
logos.
the yeah. um,
So true.
so there's a number of different things that we play into, and also just trying to showcase your own voice into that. So like recently I did a photo shoot with an accountant, and she's like, accounting's really boring and I kind of want to make it feel a little bit more fun. And one of the things we did was we got like one of those dollar guns, and
Oh my gosh, that's
for her
awesome.
headshots had like dollars falling from the sky, because it's
Oh,
like,
I would hire her then.
yeah, 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 exactly. Like, oh, she seems like she'd be a good time to work with on my books, versus like the boring spreadsheets that you picture when you're thinking accounting.
That's
Um,
so true.
so like obviously that type of headshot doesn't work for everyone and every accountant, but for her and her team who are a little bit more energized and energetic and trying to educate their clients and make them want to learn more about what their roles are and stuff, I think that type of direction was good.
And the cool thing about something like that is, if you are a person that's not interesting to you, or you are uninterested in working with a fun accountant, then you're a bore. But no, but if that's fine. But you're gonna see that picture and know, all right, that's not my girl. I just need someone that's gonna get down to it. Give me the dirty details every month, and that's it. I don't need to learn. I don't care. That's what's so great about brand photography, is you really learn like the type of people you're working with, and what you can expect, and it's not a shock. Whereas if you've ever been to a website with no photography or no nothing, no kind of imagery, you're like, okay, who is this person?
Yeah,
A logo can only tell you so much,
yeah,
and especially in our day and age where everything is so important. The people are so important behind the brand.
yeah,
And I think that's part of why brand photography has come in so much, is the people behind it are just so important.
right.
Um, and one thing I was thinking about in preparing for this is, I work with a lot of like healthcare and life science companies. And, I feel sometimes I think those companies are like, just stick to the straightforward, like headshot and whatnot. But I am seeing a trend where people are getting more into the fun headshots.
Mhm.
I am seeing more of those branding photos, even if it's not, like sometimes you'll see branding photos, yeah, with the money flying around. I
Yeah.
had books around my head in one.
Mm-hmm.
I had like a drink on my head in another. You may not see that in a more serious, like healthcare, life science consulting role,
Mm-hmm.
but I am noticing like a little bit of a change into some more um, environmental style headshots where
Yep.
people are in the environment. Is that something that you've noticed too? Like, what would you say to somebody that's like, my company doesn't need that?
Yeah, I mean, I do a lot of on-site photography for brands. So I come and I take the headshots in the working space, but I also have them have a couple of people that have consented to having their photo taken, getting the service or pretending to get the service, depending
Exactly
on
what it
how
is.
intense it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the really cool benefit of branding photography when it comes to those services, whether it's um, a medical brand or a spa or anything, is that it gives the client a preview of what to expect before they walk through your door. So they're seeing the faces that will be greeting them and working with them, and they're also seeing like, okay, like this place feels really warm and cozy, or like, okay, like I need a sterile environment. This looks like a really nice, beautiful, sterile environment for my like tooth surgery or something. So yeah, like
Yes.
it can totally showcase exactly what you're offering, because every
Yeah.
brand and every spa and every tooth surgeon, or I don't know why I'm using dentistry as an option, but like
That's okay. No.
they all do different, they all offer a different experience when you walk through the door, and they have different teams, and they have different philosophies on how they do that. So being able to open a website and see the faces and the experience is a really um, easy way to kind of push people over the edge of, signing on to your
Deciding to work with
service.
you.
Yeah. I mean,
And
a big thing that I always heard, and it's a huge cliche, is that a photo speaks 1,000 words, but it
it
does
really
in
does.
some cases, and oftentimes when you're trying to make that big splash impact on your website, it truly does.
And I think even, thinking in the world where maybe there isn't a tangible service, it's more of like consulting, or maybe you're trying to get your drug on the market,
Mhm.
you're still hiring people, you're still collaborating with people. So I think being able to have real people in your photos is really powerful,
Yep.
especially if you're hiring. In today's workforce, it is so important for employees to feel welcome, to feel like they fit in. And maybe it's something as simply as seeing the HR manager in a stock photo would be the
Mhm.
difference between someone applying and not applying. Which leads to my next question of, so why are stock photos out? I mean, for a million reasons. You guys should
Yeah.
all know this by now, but
I
you just had a
mean,
wonderful post on it. So
yeah.
reiterate on that post. We'll tag it in the comments too.
Sure. Yeah, so I mean, stock photography is out for a number of reasons, but one of the key ones is, and the one that's popping up into my mind first, because I just witnessed it I do a like website audit before a branding session. So I was
Oh,
doing
that's
one of those
awesome.
right before the call, to try to figure out areas where we can elevate the
We won't
visual
tag that.
identity.
Just
What?
kidding. I said we won't tag that.
No.
That'll remain a
um,
secret.
but um, I looked at their website and I looked at some competing websites that they provided, and they had the same image as one of their competitors.
Oh, that's so embarrassing.
And it's like, you guys are within a 20-mile radius of one another, and you both have this image on your homepage, used differently. But if
Still,
I'm someone who is looking for this service, I'm going to notice that. At
yeah.
least, I mean, I do, because I pay attention to photos. But
And
I
I
think,
do think the average consumer would probably notice something like that.
yeah, yeah. And then just reiterating kind of what we were saying earlier, it does kind of open the door to what makes your service different. So who's doing the services, what your team looks like, what your space looks like, um, you know, the products that you're using when you're
Yeah.
working with the client, whether it's a really epic piece of machinery that does really cool stuff for whatever you're doing, or if it's like the soap that you use on a face during facials. Like each spa has a different approach, each doctor has a different approach, and those things and having photos of those things are entirely different from brand to brand. And being able to have photos of that aren't stock imagery, that doesn't look like your space or doesn't align, it kind of pulls the experience away from the person looking at your site. So if all of your site has photos of that is aligning with your brand identity, and then you have that one photo of this one service that you have, but it doesn't look like everything else, it can kind of feel like, okay, well, what's that about? This, and it can kind of
Did they really do
detract
it,
the value.
or they're just throwing it on there?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a really
Exactly.
good point. Yeah, I hadn't even really thought of that. And I try to, use all the stock, my own photos everywhere,
Mhm.
because even if it's something as silly as a PowerPoint or slide deck, that only 10 people are going to see, at least they know that I put the thought and care into it.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
And like the other thing too is when you're looking at something, I had the thought and then it just like slipped out of my mind.
I had
But
one too.
yeah.
Somebody, I'm like, what? I gotta ask her about. Oh well.
Yeah. Yeah. But like if you're looking at the imagery on a website and you are starting to feel like it's disjointed, it can feel like the value of whatever, it can deter from the value that you're offering. One of my clients actually is like slowly getting rid of iPhone photos on their showcasing product on their Instagram and giving them the backlog of product photography.
Good.
Um, and yeah, it's really changed the aesthetic of their site when they go on, and
So
it
cool.
really elevates the experience when you're going onto the page versus something that's taken with an iPhone. Mind you, the photos that they were taking with an iPhone weren't terrible, but when you put them next to the brand photography, it does just have that step up.
Elevated look.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that I always say to people about like copy and logos and one, it shows that you care about your business too,
Mhm.
is that you aren't just kind of throwing this together, that you've invested in all these things. You've invested in brand photography and logos and brand identity work, and that to me shows that you've really put the thought in.
Yeah.
Oh, I know what I was going to say. And so the other day I had to make a doctor's appointment, and my doctor was not available. So they had me like go through the list.
Mhm.
And because it's such a large practice, not everybody had a photo. What do you guys think I did?
Yeah.
I only went to the people with photos.
Right.
I am sure the doctors without photos are lovely people,
Right.
but something as personal as going to the doctor,
Mhm.
I really needed to be able to see the face. So I think that is just, that to me was like a true example. I was like, oh, they need a brand photographer, because
Yeah.
even though it's an extremely well-known, medical facility, there's still something that to be said about seeing who you're going to be face to face when you're wearing a Johnny.
Totally. Yeah. Well, and okay, I remembered the point that I wanted to make. Brand photography is a rolling experience, right? So the first time that you have a brand photo shoot, you may have your whole brand guideline nailed down and everything, but the stuff that you're thinking about and the content that you're thinking about may look different than what you need a year from now. And that's usually when my clients come back to me is it's like, hey, I'm really happy with how these things turned out. Turns out we're adding a new service, or it turns out we missed this thing that I didn't think was applicable, and somehow it slipped through the cracks of what I'm asking them, and they kept needing that content. So this session, we're going to add the new service and make sure that we get the content that scratches that itch of whatever they're trying to promote in their blogs or whatever. Um, So, if you have a branding session and you feel like there's holes in your content, or you're like, oh, I tempted to use a stock image, make a note of what that content is. And then next time you do a brand photo shoot, make sure that you get it. And then you kind of fill in those holes. I mean, I've had several headshots done of myself doing different things. And that's a lesson that I've learned.
Yeah, same. I'll be like, oh my God, I didn't even have any of me alone, or me like at a computer or something like that. Something so silly that seems so mundane to me, but just kind of slipped off the radar.
Yeah.
Well, I want to make sure everybody gets on their way, but this has been so interesting. I feel like, it's just one piece of the puzzle. And we were saying that before we jumped on, is that truly, in order to create this whole beautiful brand, you need to start with everything that Malika talked about, and then add all these different pieces, me, photography, you. And then next week, our final session, we will wrap it up on graphics and design. Our friend Laura Macron is going to talk all about the things, probably that when you hear branding is actually what you think. That's why I thought it was a good one to end on, because I think when most people hear the word branding, they probably don't think of you or me, or Malika. They probably think of Laura. So we're going to talk about that. But this has been amazing. Thank you so much, Andrea. You have been such a gem, and we will see you guys next week.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.